Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV, and we're back with an update on my home network. If you've been following my adventures, we were able to get Comcast to install a Gigabit Pro connection to my house. This is a 2 gigabit symmetrical fiber optic connection, and if you haven't seen my whole series on that, it'll be linked in the playlist down below because it was quite a fun trip to go from making the first phone call to actually getting the thing installed. I'm paying for all of it, but it's really worth it given my bandwidth needs. But I had to upgrade a lot of equipment inside of my home to accommodate having 2 gigabits of bandwidth going out to the internet because my internet connection suddenly became twice as fast as my gigabit network was at the time. And for a router, I chose the Unifi UDM-PRO, and in full disclosure, Ubiquiti Networks actually sent me the device free of charge to review, and that's been kind of the starting point of my network, and this is what interfaces with the Comcast equipment. This is a very affordable product actually, especially given the performance it can deliver for multi-gigabit networks, but I've been having some trouble with it, and so far I've had to rebuild my entire network, reconfigure everything from scratch twice due to firmware updates that essentially broke my router. And I wanted to kind of step through what I experienced and also give you some advice as to how you can prevent this from happening to you, because had I made some backups, I would have been able to get back up much quicker. But I think it's important to point out some of the ongoing troubles that I and many other users are having with this product, primarily because it feels like it's still in active development given how dramatic these firmware updates are for its interface and how the router functions. So let's take a look and dive through what happened. Now, I discovered Unifi products the way many of you have through their wireless access points. They have a very affordable and simple product. I went with the Unifi AC lights here for my house, and then I was using some of their older products in my last job. And they're awesome. They're low cost, they work very reliably, and there's really just nothing to complain about there. And one of the complexities of Unifi's hardware, at least for consumers, is that you always had to have a piece of software running on something separate from the device to configure it. So you can't just plug it in and then log into its control panel. You've got to have something called a controller running, and the controller can run on a whole bunch of different things, including Mac and Windows computers. You could install the controller on a Raspberry Pi if you wanted to. You could have it booted up in a Docker container on your NAS. You could also buy a little standalone controller here that plugs in over PoE, which is pretty slick. But I was very excited when Unifi announced their Dream Machine products, both the regular Dream Machine on the left there and the UDM-PRO, which is what we're talking about today, because these products integrated the controller into the router, so you could use it more like a standard consumer device as opposed to having to have something separately running with your configuration. And I thought that was a really good idea, especially on the Dream Machine, the little cylinder there on the left, because it also incorporated an AC access point inside the device itself, along with the controller and a network switch. Now, the Dream Machine Pro, otherwise known as the UDM-PRO, doesn't integrate a Wi-Fi access point, but it is much more powerful. So it's capable of routing 7.5 gigabits per second from the internet if your provider can get you that much bandwidth. And it will do about 3.5 gigabits per second with the threat management system operating. So it's pretty powerful for its price point, which is $379. And it also integrates a network video recorder for the Unifi cameras and doorbells and other security devices. So I kind of like that idea of being able to use this thing as a center point for both my internet connection and possibly some security cameras that I might want to install in the near future. But as I mentioned, I'm having some trouble with it. Now, one of the things that I love about the Unifi gear is their centralization. I've got their app up here right now, and you can see I can get at all of my different pieces of equipment here. I can monitor ports, I can do configuration, I can do that from my phone here anywhere in the world, I can do it from my computer. I got a really cool little bandwidth meter here that's going all the time, and it's really nice just to be able to get a quick view as to what's going on my network. And if you're using Unifi switches in addition to your other Unifi gear, you can get an idea as to how much network bandwidth, even just within the internal network, that different pieces of equipment are using. So for example, I am currently sending NDI video to my vMix computer, and I can at a glance just see which devices on my network are using the most bandwidth, irrespective of whether or not that traffic is on the internet or the local network. It's just a really nice integration here. The problem, though, is that every once in a while, at least in my experience, that awesome integration and software that you can run on the Unifi-Pro just goes kaput, and I can't get into it at all. Most recently, I came down after being unable to access the app to seeing this screen on my UDM-Pro's display telling me that it's having a boot issue. And I tried to reboot it. I pulled power. I did everything I could possibly do. And it just kept coming back to that screen, and I was unable to configure it. The good news is that internally, the controller is separate from the actual networking hardware, including the routing function. So everything was working on the network. I wasn't off the internet, and the network was functioning just fine, but I couldn't monitor anything, and I couldn't change any settings. I couldn't even log into the router to do anything. And unfortunately, I was forced to reset everything from scratch, and that was the second time I had to do it. Now, to reset everything, I had to run around the house and stick pins in all the access points reset buttons along with all the stuff on the rack. And it's really kind of hard to keep the pin in there long enough because it slips off, and it's just a time-consuming mess. Now, I guess there is a way that you can SSH into these devices and do it via a command, but I was unable to get into them even with my passwords that I had set up on the router initially. So I must have missed something there, but needless to say, I had to run around, take things off the ceiling, and do the reset thing for the second time this year. Now, I did reach out to support because I was curious to see how quickly I would get a response. So I wrote to them with everything that I was experiencing here. I said that I was unable to log into the control panel, the app doesn't work, I've done X, Y, and Z to try to reset everything. And I got a response back pretty quickly, but it was pretty useless because they wanted me to send them a screenshot of what? And I also told them I can't log in locally. So it's kind of SOL there. I responded to them saying that, look, your response wasn't helpful. Is there any way that I can get into this thing short of resetting it? And they never responded. It wasn't until I put a thing up on Reddit that things got moving again. And I always like to do this because not everybody has a YouTube channel, so I wanted to see exactly what the support experience would be, and it wasn't great. The good news, I think, for Unifi owners is that most of us are pretty savvy, and I think we're pretty good at helping each other, but that support response to me was very much inadequate. Now, on Sunday afternoon, I had some time. I didn't have a lot of faith that I was going to find a support solution to this, so I visited the URL that was on my display, and I learned how to put the UDM-PRO into recovery mode. And for a moment, I was kind of relieved because it looked like I could just upload a firmware file and maybe overwrite whatever was corrupted on the Unifi software that was running on the router. So I did that, and it didn't look as though this option would wipe out all of my settings, but as it turns out, it does wipe out all of your settings, and I had to go then do the reset thing and get the network reconfigured from scratch. And I'm still not done yet because I still have to set up my VLANs. All my IoT devices that were on the VLAN before are off of it right now, so I've got a lot of work to do still to fully recover my settings from where we are at. Now, as I mentioned, this is the second time that this has happened to me, and both instances have been the result of some kind of firmware bug that got pushed down to my router automatically. Now, you don't have to have the router update itself automatically, but I do, because I am no longer managing my network for a living. I am making videos for a living, and I want to be focused on my job, not some of this other stuff. And my Synology NAS updates itself automatically. Some of the other critical equipment that I have here, I have set to auto. And the reason is that if there is some zero-day security thing, I want to be protected, and I just want my equipment to update itself as quickly as possible to close whatever holes there might be. And that's what I had this thing set to, and unfortunately, it got me twice. Now, the first time this happened, I thought it might have been due to the settings that I had initially started with, because rather than set it up from scratch when I got the UDM-PRO, I was lazy and kind of excited to get my new 2 gig connection going, and I just imported my settings from the original Dream Machine to the new one. And after they pushed down a big firmware update, something just didn't jive with the settings that were loaded on, and I was locked out, and I had to reset everything from scratch. And the settings that I established after that first incident were the ones that I was running with when this incident occurred. Now, I am going to take some of the blame for this because I did not set myself up well for recovery. I did not back up my settings. I don't know why I didn't do that. And the other thing I didn't do was enable some features of the router that might have let me get in and force a reset of the controller. So let me show you what I have done to prevent maybe this headache in the future, and something you should do also, because none of these settings are default. So on your home screen of your router, your UDM-PRO router, you're going to want to click on System Settings. You're going to want to go to Advanced, and you're going to want to turn on SSH and set the password. And the reason why you want to do that is because you can log in via SSH and force that controller software to reboot. There was a bunch of people on Reddit who experienced the same thing that I did with this version of the firmware, and they were able to basically, kick it into gear and get back in and be able to recover, or actually just get everything working again via the terminal connection. Because I did not have this on initially, I was locked out completely, because you need to have the ability to log into the control panel to turn SSH on in the first place. So that was point one. The second issue was that I did not have a backup, and so I decided to get the backup set up now for this device. But they have changed how the backups work. So before, you used to be able to make a backup and download it, and so you could have it on a file, and then if you ever had an issue, you could grab that file, upload it to the device after you reset it, and everything will come back to where it was. Now, on the default screen here, backups are only going to the cloud. That's it. So when you schedule your backups, it's going to store 20 of them in the Unifi cloud service. You don't have to pay for it, at least at the moment, but you have no way to download them unless you have reset your router and are trying to restore it. And that router will be able to pull the backups from your cloud account and restore. My understanding, though, in reading some of the Reddit posts and some of the support pages, is that you can only restore the backup to the device that made the backup. So if you have an RMA replacement coming in, you're out of luck. So just be aware of that, because this is not something that's accessible. And the only thing you can do when you look on your cloud account to see what backups are up there is delete them. You can't download them. You would think that would be a pretty common sense thing to do. And this whole cloud backup thing must be really new in whatever firmware update they just pushed down, because on the support pages, it's still pointing at the prior way of doing it, which allows you to download the file. In fact, this support document that I've got, at least at the moment, is what is being linked to from the recovery page that I went to initially to figure out how to get my thing back up and running. It has no mention of cloud backups on here at all. And a lot of users are stumbling into this as they are in the process of trying to recover their systems. Here's an example from a Reddit post here about the cloud backup and how they can't actually get them to work on their device that they're trying to restore. And there was a user that pointed this person at the quote-unquote old interface. So within each of these Unifi routers, there's an option to switch to the classic interface, where you can get at features that they haven't yet implemented in the current version of their UI. And again, this just speaks to how this product feels like a beta, like it's in development, yet a lot of us are running them in production environments. So my advice would be to probably disable the automatic firmware updates and only do them when you're on site and can supervise and verify that you've got a backup with this procedure that this Reddit user is describing, in case something goes wrong. Because again, I've had now 2 firmware updates that have totally knocked me out of commission here, and it's really kind of concerning that you're sitting on this little time bomb that gets a firmware update pushed down to it, and suddenly you're out of whack. And if you're supporting a bunch of these for clients, I can imagine it would result in a very bad day. Now, ultimately, I think these issues will get resolved. This is a very different product for Ubiquiti. They're really trying to centralize things around their cloud services with these Dream Machine products, and I'm sure things will start running better as this product matures. But I've really felt like, even though this is a shipping production product, that it's very much a beta. So just be careful with those firmware updates as this continues to get developed. And related to some of their cloud centralization, there are some concerns about the security of their cloud network. We all got the email from Unifi about their big data breach, and Krebs on Security here back in April had more details about it. It looks like this might have been an insider that had access to some of the passwords for the Amazon AWS services that Ubiquiti uses for its cloud infrastructure. And we haven't heard much about the investigation since these stories ran in April. And what I'm curious about is where this investigation is and how vulnerable we might be, because a whistleblower told Krebs that the reason why they don't know how bad this was because they weren't logging database access. So I think it's probably time, unless there's some FBI investigation going on, that Unifi be upfront with users about the security of this cloud, what steps they have taken to secure it better, and how we can be assured that our data, which is increasingly becoming more centralized within these cloud servers, is safe, because the access to your network is really a critical piece of security. And to have something sitting in a database that was very easily accessed in the way it was a few months ago has me uneasy, especially because we haven't heard anything since the springtime when this first happened. So that is the current state of our networking woes here at the house. Thankfully, everything that I did on Sunday is still working right now, and if things change, I will definitely let you know. I've got to get those IoT devices redone this weekend, so that's going to be another project, and hopefully this is the last time I have to do this, but I'm not holding my breath. Let me know what you thought down in the comments below. If you have a UDM-PRO, also let me know what your experiences have been. I have a feeling that whatever hardware revision I'm running on might be more susceptible to some of these firmware bugs, because they are coming out with new revisions on the hardware, and it's hard to say what's different between one or the other, but I think people that have bought these more recently are having a better run than the people that got them earlier. So let me know, and I will see you next time. Until next time, this is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching.
This channel is brought to you by the Lon.TV supporters, including gold level supporters Chris Allegretta, Tom Albrecht, Jim Callagher, Hot Sauce and Video Games, and Brian Parker. If you want to help the channel, you can by contributing as little as $1 a month. Head over to lon.tv/support to learn more. And don't forget to subscribe. Visit lon.tv/s.